It's not wrong of me to fall in love or feel love for another human being or feel like I want to love another human being. There's something wrong with me wanting to make that wrong, I told her, this new therapist. And she said to me, there's absolutely nothing wrong with feeling any feelings of love you ever have. There's never anything wrong with any feelings of love. And she was so sure of herself. She would just have a smile, like a Buddha smile, just a very slight smile on her face. And it was so like night and day with this man that I did with my first long-term therapist, you know. And we'd been working so hard in the baseball metaphor to be straight and take out the chicks and all that, you know. And then I meet with this woman, and she was so busy there. She only had time to see me during lunch, and we'd go out during her lunch hour. We'd sit outside, and she'd sit on a bench. I'd sit next to her. She'd be eating her sandwich or something. And she'd be saying that to me, because that's where my interest always was. I was not interested in a life of eating and shitting. Life was only to be handled if I was in the process of taking it seriously, which for me meant my existence is constantly creating meaning. And with that, it creates meaning. It goes on and on, creating meaning, creating meaning, creating meaning. And if I'm more and more with that creation of meaning, I get more out of the experience. And that's what I've been trying to put into practice since I'm on my late preteen years, probably. As I've understood that over time. So, picture how I'm trying to address these guys back in the early or middle of 1976. We gay men are at a key time in the evolution of our gay consciousness. We have been struggling to reach a great vision early in us, which we first sensed only in the vaguest ways. We have all felt this vision, lying inside, watching, showing itself in dreams, directing our acts and beliefs in unseen ways. In the modern gay liberation movement, the history of men's struggles has been the history of groping towards our vision, sensing it in the values of androgyny. This was a big word at the time. I can get into explaining what that word refers to, androgyny, and now it's more like a word, right? And again, also this is talking about when I said the history of men's struggles, again, this is the period when women have withdrawn from being involved with men. And so that leaves men remaining, so to speak. The women have withdrawn from participating with the men. And so that's why I say, in the modern gay liberation movement, the history of men's struggles has been the history, meaning there's also the history of women's struggles, which I don't get into. The history of men's struggles has been the history of groping towards our vision, sensing it in the values of androgyny and revolution and free sexuality. It has led us to stonewall, to gender fuck. Gender fuck is where you dress up as both sexes simultaneously and shocks people who are identified with one biological gender overmuch. People are already more relaxed about it than not. I used to do this, believe it or not. Before I met Harry, I used to make trouble by putting on a skirt, putting on screaming red makeup, screaming red lipstick on my lips, extremely blue or even purple eyeshadow with glitter, okay, super long lashes that like went out to here, some kind of wig or scarf, crazy scarf or something like that, and a blouse seat number, and at least one other person, if not more, who we dressed analogously, and we would drive out to where the tourists will all come at night in San Francisco, which is a street called Broadway. And we would park several blocks away where you could find the parking, and then we would walk up to Broadway. We would just walk up and down Broadway, skipping a little bit, and dancing a little bit. So sometimes we'd have little bells or something, and ring the bells, and you know, and it was like, oh, it's like, these people go hysterical, the man in a dress. I kid you not. When I was still more in the outer world, because that alternate world was dominated theoretically or ideologically by people who come out of the Marxist background, materialist background, I follow that too. And that's like the Angels of Light before them, the Coquettes. Believe it or not, it's all the costumes and the outfits and the way you behave and the way you show up, and it's all about doing that in a different way, and you're suggesting a different political reality, but you're doing it extrovertedly. And And that's the trans. It's still materialist. It's extroverted, meaning it's interested in becoming more about the mind, but it's still what's outside the mind. It's still extroverted, all that life. And Don Clark was the first man I met who was interested in the introvert life, along with the extrovert life. When I assisted him in doing the weekends, he showed me how you could really get into cultivating the introvert life in ways I had not. I knew about from theories and from different schools of spirituality and stuff, developing the introvert life. But I'd never seen it cultivated in such a psychological, yet tangible way by someone like Don Clark. He was a great master at what he would do with with me and then the other guys and who showed up in himself during these weekends he would go to. They weren't mere, it wasn't like what Est became. That's not what Don did. It wasn't like that. It's hard to describe now what the experience was like. All things like Est and stuff developed later on as actually imitations of this experience. Imitations of this experience. But Don had gone all around the country, and there were different, in the 60s there were different what they call encounter groups, and things like Essalon and places where you did different kind of odd experiences. And he went around to different places that did stuff like that, and he put together a bunch of them, and then made it about people's sexuality as alternate to heterosexuality. No one had ever done that, and he wanted people to go into owning that, integrating their shadows about that. And that's what I hadn't known before, was that all this stuff on the extrovert side had a shadow, introvert side. I didn't understand it as a shadow at first, or this introvert side. But that's what I eventually began to get oriented towards, to get more and more interested in. That it was easy to do the outer stuff compared to the inner stuff. And the stuff that like people would go through in a Don Clark weekend had to be backed up after they got home to keep it up. And to keep developing those ways that they had opened up or they had felt or experienced on new levels in new kinds of ways. And often there wasn't really the support for that. And so, you know, my activist involvement was around that in the community, vis-a-vis Don Clark and others. I was a member of the Gay Men's Clubs at the Berkeley Free Clinic across the bay. And we not only put on the talks, so we were trying to support other kinds of things. But then when I got this pull from the spirit that I didn't want to do that anymore. That's all the people I said goodbye to, right? And it was this essay I was working on when I met Faerie. I met him because I went to a lecture by Arthur Evans. And Arthur was this emigre from New York, like I told you, and he was writing this book, doing these chapters that eventually were each a lecture. And then he turned them into a book called Witchcraft and the Gay Counterculture. So before it was a book, he was giving lectures at what was then the Gay Center in San Francisco. And I coincidentally, for one of these lectures, I turned to the person, the stranger next to me, and introduced myself, and started talking to the person. And after I talked to him for a little while, he said to me, "You are as weird as someone else I know, and you are just like him, and you gotta meet him. You are so wildly weird. And you remind me exactly of this person I know in New Mexico, and you have to meet him." And he insisted on it. So I got Harry's phone number. I believe I called him up. I said, "This guy I met at Arthur Evans' lecture said you were as weird as I am, and I should call you up." I called him in New Mexico, and we exchanged some letters, you know, and it was all about this kind of thing. This is the kind of thing I was trying to get at. And I discovered Harry was on an analogous, at some kind of analogous place, right? The idea of vision, right? We've been struggling to reach a great vision buried in us, which we first sensed only in the vaguest ways. We have all felt this vision lying inside, watching, showing itself in dreams, directing our acts and beliefs in unseen ways. In the modern gay liberation movement, the history of men's struggles has been the history of groping towards our vision, meaning towards actualizing our vision, sensing it in the values of androgyny, in revolution, in free sexuality. It has led us to Stonewall, to genderfuck, to the birth of a new gay culture, by which I mean this alternate to assimilation. But during the past few years, it appeared that our movement ran out of steam. many militant groups faded, as did the brassy, colorful rebels and our flagrant, joyous celebrations. They seemed to be replaced by a new movement, the vocal gay normals, fighting in the courts, the churches, the mental health professions, gaining advocate after advocate, victory after victory. I'm speaking a long time ago. You have to picture a time when middle-class people were not gay, and then they're suddenly becoming gay. I'm reacting to that. It was as if the homophile movement for equal rights, taking new freedom from our radical flowering, thrust towards radical at the time meant you live your life openly as gay and not as something else and gay, but it's the same thing. To be open is, and be a person is to be gay. Taking new freedom from our radical flowering thrust towards its goal of mainstream assimilation, leading the mass of gays with them, and deflowering our movement, the movement toward our vision. The homophile movement for equality is a dead thing, and there is a competition with Harry. Remember I told you about this competition? He can't see or relate to anyone. You have to go to object relations theory. Go to object relations theory. Harry can't see himself versus another person in his regard without there being competition. He cannot experience his subjectivity as himself vis-a-vis another person being a subjectivity without there being competition in order to define where the boundary is, and that competition not only defines the boundary then, but it has to be top dog or underdog on top of it. And as psychology, he doesn't want to hear about it. Okay, but so there's the, otherwise you wouldn't know that in the comment that I'm making here and why I say things the way that I do. The homophile movement for equality is a dead thing. Though you see, I'm using homophile now as if it was conservative or even reactionary. So at the time homophile was invented, Harry and the others who invented the word way back in the beginning of the 50s meant it as a radical thing, because it was a new word, no one knew it at the time. So it could have a different meaning. And they were rebelling against the use of the word homosexual and the use of other kinds of words. And later on there was the word gay, but they didn't have that in the common sense back then because they associate gay with bar life. The gay life was still strongly associated with, originally the word gay, if you go back a few hundred years, it could mean you drink a lot at the taverns and you are kind of wild in your lifestyle. And so you might be called gay, for example. And they're even, the etymologies of words are really interesting, how words come to have the usage that they have. But back then it didn't have gay in the way we use it now. And so homophile was an invention. Harry was an important ringleader of the people who invented and then used the word homophile, which was an important word and used in important ways. And even though I'm digging it here, I'm putting it down in a way I sense recant. And we don't know that from reading this. Here, we only know the history up till this point. Okay, but later on I do recant my nastiness. And we can go into that as you might find interesting. You don't get the whole picture by hearing what the speaker is saying at this time and place. You only get that snapshot this time. But in terms of getting the snapshot this time, interesting. It's really interesting because otherwise it's a kind of attitude and feeling that's completely gone. It does, like I said before, has no existence and validity anymore. Whether it deserves to not be thus, I don't know. That's something else. But nonetheless, so reading a little more. The homophile movement for equality, meaning assimilationism, is a dead thing. Dead to the gay vision, anti-magical, counter-revolutionary. If one can imagine working magic or trying to work magic as revolution, not fun or playing or having a good time or impressing people or finding something out even. I mean specifically as a political act, but not for show, so I don't mean it to show either. In response to the sterile domination of the assimilationists, many of us gay men have turned to a wholehearted embrace of a non-gay theoretical perspective, Marxism. And you wouldn't, when I lived in San Francisco, you couldn't believe how many gay folk, gay men most particularly, but some women too, were actually hardcore Marxists. but not to the extent so hardcore that they would be Marxists and drop their gayness, because any of the official Marxist groups wouldn't allow you to be gay, except for one very kooky Marxist offshoot that I was aware of at the time. If you were gay, you couldn't be a member of any of these Marxists or so.